Survivor Type by Stephen King. This is one of those twisted stories that once you read it, you just can't shake it no matter how hard you try. The story is a diary. The narrator is Richard Pine, a surgeon stranded on a tiny island after his ship goes down. And right away you can tell Pine is not a hero. He's arrogant, he was doing illegal things for money, and he happened to be on that ship smuggling a massive load of pure heroin. But ironically, that heroin is the one thing he has plenty of. No food, no clean water, just his surgical tools and kilos of heroin. At first, Pine tries to hold it together. He writes in his diary in this clinical, almost professional tone. But then, the hunger starts getting to him in a way that's hard to even describe. And then the accident happens. He breaks his ankle badly. Anyone else would give up. But Pine is a survivor. And this is where the story gets really dark. Because Pine doesn't think of his body as something sacred. He thinks of it as a machine. He looks at his infected foot and thinks, well, if I don't remove it, I'll die of gangrene. And if I do remove it, I have meat. That's the twisted logic that drives the rest of the story. Pine uses the heroin as anesthesia so he can't feel the pain and starts amputating himself. And what's really disturbing isn't just the act itself, it's how he describes it in the diary. He talks about successful operations. He starts eating his own limbs to keep from starving. It's this constant cycle. He removes a part, eats it, survives a few more days, and then needs another one. As the pages go on, the diary falls apart. The handwriting changes. The sentences stop making sense because he's out of his mind on heroin and because there's less and less of him left. It makes you wonder at what point you stop being a person and become just a mouth trying to feed itself. The last entry is barely readable. Pine describes the taste of his own fingers and laughs about how good the roast he's making smells. The story ends with that image in your head of a man who is literally just a torso and a head, writing with the last arm and fingers he has left. It's one of those stories that haunts you at nights after reading it. It just leaves you feeling sick and looking at your own hands differently after you put it down. The Autopsy by Michael Shea. So, this story is probably one of the most claustrophobic and dense things ever written in the genre. What makes it brilliant is that it starts out as a completely dry medical drama, almost boring, and ends up being full-on first-rate alien horror. The main character is Dr. Carl Winters, a veteran forensic pathologist. He has terminal cancer. That detail matters. The guy is already a little detached from life. His own body is already betraying him, so he looks at death with this unsettling calm. He gets called in to a remote mining town because there was a strange explosion and someone needs to examine a pile of bodies. The local doctor isn't equipped for it and the sheriff wants answers. Winters sets up in a makeshift morgue and gets to work. And at first, everything is exactly what you'd expect. Blunt force trauma, asphyxiation, the kind of damage you get when a mine collapses on people. But then he starts noticing things that don't fit. The internal damage on some of the bodies isn't consistent with the explosion. There are signs of movement inside the body cavities after death, not decomposition, something else. Like something was in there and left, or wasn't there and then was. Winters keeps going. He's a professional. He documents everything. And then, leaning over one of the bodies to get a better look at something, the body grabs him. What lives inside the bodies is not human. It's a parasite, something that enters a corpse and uses the nervous system to move it around. It can't bring the body back to life in any real way, but it can control the muscles well enough to be useful. And now that Winters knows it exists, it can't let him leave the room. The creature is arrogant about it. It explains to Winters that its species uses humans like suits, parasites that hide in our anatomy and control us without anyone noticing. The problem is that the body it's in is too damaged from the explosion, and it needs a new host. Winters is the only option available. And here is where the body horror fuses with something almost heroic and brutal at the same time. Winters knows he can't escape, but he also knows human biology better than almost anyone alive. He figures out that the alien needs the host senses to operate in our world. The eyes, the ears, the tongue. So in a final act of pure will, Winters uses his surgical tools on himself, not to save himself, to ruin the suit. Before the creature takes full control, Winters destroys his own eyes, ears, and vocal cords, turning his own body into a dark, silent cell where the alien is trapped, unable to see or feel or interact with anything. The story ends with the police finding Winters' body and a recording he left behind explaining everything. That image is what stays with you. a man who dismantled himself piece by piece to win a war nobody else even knew was happening. In the Hills, The Cities by Clive Barker. So if you thought the parasites or the amputations were intense, wait for this one. This story is one of the most ambitious and visually terrifying ideas ever put on paper. What makes it special is that it takes the concept of tradition and turns it into something physical that just blows your mind. The story follows a couple, Mick and Judd, on a road trip through former rural Yugoslavia. They're a normal couple, having normal road trip arguments, complaining about the heat and the maps, but while they're dealing with their personal drama, they accidentally drive straight into the middle of a ritual that's been happening in that region for centuries. So there are two rival cities, Popolac and Podujevo, but they don't compete in sports or economics. Their tradition is that every 10 years, every single person in the city, men, women, and children, physically joins together to form one being, and not in any symbolic way. They use harnesses, ropes, and scaffolding to bind themselves together until they form a human giant thousands of meters tall. It's an engineering project made of biology. Some people are the muscles, some are the bones, some are the balance system. They are cities that walk. The horror starts when the two giants meet in the hills to fight. It's majestic and horrible at the same time. But then a human error happens. In the Podujevo giant, someone at the bottom gives out, or a rope snaps, or a bone breaks, and the entire giant collapses. Imagine tens of thousands of people falling from kilometers in the air, crushing each other. It's not just a tragedy. It's an accidental genocide in a matter of seconds. Mick and Judd arrive just after the disaster. They find the trail of destruction and eventually see the surviving giant, the one from Popolac. But here's where the psychological part comes in. The Popolac giant, after watching its rival die and feeling the weight of thousands of people screaming in unison, goes insane. It's not a city anymore. It's a blind beast walking through the mountains with no direction. The ending is what leaves you cold. Judd tries to run, terrified by the sheer scale of what he's seeing, but Mick becomes hypnotized by it. There's something about that collective mass, that total loss of individuality, that pulls him in. Mick ends up climbing the giant, pulling himself up through the bodies and the ropes to become part of it, leaving behind his life and his partner and his sanity to be just one more cell in this god of flesh disappearing into the horizon. Guts by Chuck Palahniuk. So, this story will actually keep you up at night, and it's so notorious that when the author reads it out loud on his tours, people literally faint in the audience. That's not an exaggeration. What makes this story the ultimate body horror is that there are no aliens, no magic, no mad scientists. It's just human stupidity and the fragility of the body combined in a situation you absolutely cannot escape from. The story starts out very casually. The narrator is talking to you about masturbation and how people look for increasingly extreme ways to feel something. He tells you a couple of quick anecdotes to bring your guard down. And then we get to the main event. It's the story of a kid who decides it would be a great idea to masturbate in his swimming pool, underwater, using the suction pipe of the filter to, well, you know. So he's there, enjoying the moment, and then he realizes the suction pressure is too strong. He tries to pull away, but he can't. The pool filter is a powerful machine and it doesn't care what's on the other end of it. The kid starts panicking as the air in his lungs runs out. He's trapped at the bottom, alone, with the sun shining on the surface above him and nobody coming to help. And this is where the story becomes unbearable. Because he can't get free and he needs to get to the surface to breathe, the kid does the only thing his survival instinct tells him to do. He pulls as hard as he can. But the vacuum the filter creates is absolute. The suction is so violent that it literally starts pulling his insides out through his rectum. The writer describes it with surgical, disgusting detail. The kid looks through the crystal clear water of the pool and watches his own intestines floating around him like sea snakes. Meters and meters of his own digestive system coming out of him. To get to the surface and not drown, the kid ends up having to bite through his own guts to sever them and break the suction. He makes it out of the water, but his life is changed forever. The ending isn't a dramatic death, it's something much more disturbing than that. The kid survives but has to spend the rest of his life with a colostomy bag, reminded every time he eats or uses the bathroom that he left a vital part of himself in a pool filter one afternoon, for a moment of pleasure. Caterpillars by Edward Frederick Benson. This story starts out looking like a typical British ghost story set in an Italian villa, but it quickly turns into something way more biological and revolting. What you will like about it is that you don't need a lab or a deserted island. The horror finds you in your own hotel room. The story is told by a man staying at a guest house for a few days. Everything is very civilized. Dinners, conversation, the Italian sun. But there's one room, number 11, that nobody wants to use. The narrator, who is your typical skeptic, ends up taking a look inside. And what he sees isn't a traditional ghost. What he sees are caterpillars, but not normal garden caterpillars. He describes them as finger-sized creatures, pale and sickly-looking, like washed-out flesh. They have hundreds of tiny hairy legs, and they move in a way that turns his stomach. The most disturbing thing is that they don't look like real insects at all. They look like something that grew wrong, like tumors with legs. He's so horrified he leaves the room immediately. But when he comes back with someone else, the creatures are gone. Nobody believes him, of course. They think it was a nightmare or the summer heat. Time passes, and a friend of his named Arthur Inglis arrives at the villa. There's no other room available, so they give him room 11. The narrator tries to warn him but doesn't want to sound crazy, so he says nothing. Inglis sleeps there and not long after starts feeling unwell. This is where Benson connects the supernatural horror with the rawest medical reality. A few weeks later, the narrator finds out his friend has developed a devastating cancer, and not just any cancer. The doctors described the tumor as something that grew with a speed and aggressiveness that was completely unnatural, almost like it had a life of its own. The moment the story hits you is when the narrator realizes what he saw in that room. Those caterpillars weren't animals. They were the physical manifestation of the disease before it attacked his friend. They were cancer cells that had taken form, lurking in the shadows of that room, waiting for someone to devour from the inside. The story ends without any big explosion, just that cold understanding that what he saw crawling across the floor of room 11 was his friend's fate moving around in the dark. It's the kind of story that makes you second-guess every shadow and stain in the corner of your room, wondering if it's just dust or something waiting for the right moment to start eating you up from inside. The Thing in the Weeds by Junji Ito. So if you're looking for the most primal, terrifying biological story, then we have to talk about this one. While the writer Junji Ito is famous for his manga, his narrative concepts are some of the purest body horror ever conceived. This one takes the idea of being stuck and turns it into a biological nightmare that defies physics. The story follows a group of hikers who find something impossible in the deep woods, an abandoned, ancient plane wreck. But the wreck isn't empty. Inside, they find a man who has been missing for decades. The crazy part? He's still alive. He's thin, pale, and looks like a skeleton, but his heart is beating. He's been trapped in the same position for 30 years, unable to move a single muscle. At first, the hikers think it's a miracle. They call for help, they try to lift him out, but as soon as they try to move him, they realize why he's still there. He isn't just sitting in the plane, he's part of the plane. When they pull on his arm, they see that his muscle fibers have stretched out like long red wires, threading through the metal floor, weaving into the engine, and snaking into the very earth beneath the wreck. His nervous system has literally expanded outside of his skin. He has become a biological circuit board, his veins and nerves acting as roots that have claimed the entire structure as his new body. And then they find the others, because he wasn't alone. The deeper they go into the woods, the more they realize that the entire forest is alive in the worst way possible. People who disappeared years ago are fused into the trees, their spines elongated to match the trunks, their rib cages opened up to serve as branches. They aren't dead. They are conscious. They feel every bird that lands on them, every breeze that shakes their leaves, which are actually just thin, translucent layers of their own stretched-out skin. What makes this story haunting is the absolute loss of autonomy. It's the idea that your body can be hijacked by nature and repurposed into something functional but agonizing. You aren't being eaten, you're being used. You become a living statue, a piece of the landscape that can still feel pain but can no longer scream because your vocal cords are now part of a root system 10 feet underground. The story ends with the realization that this infection is spreading. It's not a virus, it's an evolution. It's the Earth deciding that humans are better used as infrastructure than as individuals. Anyway, that's The Thing in the Weeds. It's the ultimate reminder that we are just biological material, and in the right or wrong conditions, that material can be reshaped into something you would never recognize as human. The Fly by George Langland. So, most people know this one from the 80s movie, but the original story by George Langelaan has this quality of classical tragedy that hits you in a completely different way. It starts like a murder mystery. The story is told by Francois, the brother of the main character. He gets a phone call in the middle of the night telling him that his sister-in-law Hélène has killed his brother André in a hydraulic press at their factory. The insane thing is she doesn't deny it. She confesses right away. But the one thing she won't stop asking about is a fly, a specific fly with a white head. She needs someone to find it. Through a long flashback, we find out what actually happened. André was a brilliant scientist, the kind of genius who always seems to have everything under control. He'd been working on disintegrating and reassembling matter, basically teleportation. Everything was going well until he decided to test it on himself. Classic scientific arrogance moment. He's convinced the technology is perfect, but right as he activates the process, a common housefly slips into the pod with him. The result is a complete biological disaster. André comes out of the second pod, but he's not André anymore. He has the head and one arm of a giant fly, and the fly, somewhere in the lab, now has a tiny human head and a little white leg. What follows is the saddest and most disgusting part. André hides in his lab with a black cloth over his head so his wife can't see him. They communicate through notes because he can't speak anymore. He just makes strange noises. Hélène tries to help him, tries to save the man she loves, but André can feel his human mind slipping away. The fly instincts are taking over. He's having impulses he shouldn't be having, and he knows it's only a matter of time before whatever is left of him as a person is just gone. The horror peaks when Hélène finally sees what's under the cloth. It's not just a monster. It's something familiar, fused with something completely alien. André convinces her that she has to kill him, destroy the evidence, end his suffering. She helps him put his fly head and arm under the hydraulic press so nothing is left. But the real gut punch, the thing that stays with you, is what Francois finds later in the garden. A tiny fly caught in a spider's web, with a miniature human face, screaming in a faint human voice right before the spider reaches it. He kills the spider, and then he kills the fly. The Voice in the Night by William Hope Hodgson. So, this is a classic of maritime horror, but it skips the giant squids and the ghost ships and focuses on something way more subtle and disgusting: mold. What makes it work so well is the mystery of it. You never see the monster until the very end. The story starts on a ship, stuck in a dense, silent fog in the middle of the ocean. Out of nowhere, they hear someone approaching in a rowboat, but the guy won't come close to the lights. He stays out in the darkness, asking for food. He sounds desperate, but also ashamed. He says he can't let anyone see him. The sailors pass food down in a bucket, and in exchange, the man starts telling them how he got there. He and his fiancée survived a shipwreck and made it to an island that at first glance looks like it's just covered in some kind of gray moss or fungus. It's everywhere. On the rocks, on the remains of other ships, on the trees. At first it's just an annoyance, but they quickly realize the fungus is aggressive. It grows fast, and here's where hunger comes in. They have nothing to eat. They spend days searching, but the only thing on that island is the gray fungus. At first they hold out, but hunger is a powerful thing. The fiancée is the first to try it, and to her surprise she says it tastes good, sweet, almost addictive. So they both start eating it, and that's where things turn into a biological nightmare. The fungus isn't just food. It's a parasite that starts replacing them. It doesn't grow on top of their skin. It fuses with it. The man describes how his hands start losing their shape, how his skin turns gray and rough like a giant crust forming over him. They start feeling like they belong to the island. The connection gets so strong that they can't leave anymore. The moment that really turns your stomach is when the man explains that his fiancée can't move anymore. She's fused almost completely with the wood of their shelter. He only made it out to find food because he still has just enough human left in him to move his arms. At the end, when the rowboat pulls away after picking up the food, the fog clears for a second. The sailors get a glimpse of the silhouette in the boat. It's not a man. It's a gray, shapeless mass with bumps where the limbs should be, but no joints. Just a pile of fungus in the rough shape of a human rowing back into the dark.